Okay.
So welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. Please note that this meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. You are also reminded to note that we have members of the public or press observing today's proceedings. Can ask those who are observing today's meeting to keep their microphones and cameras switched off throughout. Can members of the local review body leave their cameras on but mute their microphone when not speaking? As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the meeting during consideration of any of these reviews. This meeting has been convened in response to 3 requests for review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the Council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I now pass to Ms McBain, Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed in the conduct of these reviews and to take a roll call of all 3 members. Ms McBain.
Thank you, Chair. So please just indicate you're present. So, Chairperson?
I'm here.
Councillor Copeland?
Present.
And Councillor MacDonald?
Present.
Thank you. I'll just go through the procedure. So members have the procedure note, which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. I would like to draw the LRB's attention to the following. The first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. The circumstances in which additional matters can be taken into account are set out in the legislation and will be addressed by the LRB's advisors where relevant. The review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, turning to consideration of the first review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the erection of a replacement dwelling house with integrated garage, associated site works and hard surfacing and parking at 32 Hillview Crescent, Aberdeen. Planning reference 230825. We'll now hear from Planning Advisor in attendance, Ms Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out that Ms Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she's not been involved in the early consideration of the application under review. Ms Green will not, however, be able to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms Green.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have the application for green pastures as first variation of condition 4. I think
That's not. Give me a second.
So have I. I think, did we not hear that at planning the other day?
So we've got section 42, the variation of condition 4 is the first one to be considered. Did I put that wrong in your speech, Chair?
Quite possibly, yes.
Sorry.
Give me a second, I'll just go back into my papers again. I need more screens at home, that's what the reason is.
Templates.
Hopefully modern gov loads, because it's locked me out a couple of times this morning so far.
Yep, so the first review is definitely for green pasture, Lucy.
Yeah.
okay. Shall I share my presentation?
Yes, let's share the
So-
presentation for that one. Okay, and that's the presentation shared.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just sharing the wrong screen. Just commitment. Okay, so this is application reference 231289 S42, a request for review against an application refused under delegated powers for the variation of condition 4, which was the time limit on application 221571. And the review has been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The applicant indicated on the notice of review that there are no new matters raised in the review submissions. And in terms of procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that the review should proceed on the basis of the information submitted. So I will continue to provide some background to the case before handing back to you, convener, for members to discuss the case and ask any questions. So this is the location plan. The site's approximately 3.5 kilometres northwest of Cooter, accessed from a private road which serves nearby houses and off a minor road. That's the road between Cooter and Elrip. And this is the site plan showing the site of the mobile home just here. And this is the soakaway for foul drainage. And just to add that the land rises towards the north to a sort of hill crest around the location of the site. And this is just taken from Google Maps, showing the site here. Just under here is the house that's being built at the moment and is referenced in the submissions, and stables that are also referenced. And that's the site outlined in red with the temporary accommodation and the soakaway, and then the wider site of 2.3 hectares, which includes the stables and the house under construction. And this is elevations of the existing mobile home that's on site, and it's just over 12 metres by just over 6 metres in depth and 3.6 metres high. And it's been on site since May 2021. And that's the floor plan. So as I mentioned, this is an application to vary condition 4 on a previous application. And that previous application, 221571, was for a change of use of the land for the erection of a temporary chalet mobile home. And it was subject to a number of conditions, of which this was one of them. So this obviously includes a time limit for the mobile home remaining on site. And that time limit was October 2023, after which the mobile home would need to be removed and the site restored to form part of the curtilage of the dwelling house. There were other conditions also on that application, and those were that the chalet should be occupied by an employee of the stud farm, that there would only be one mobile home permitted, covered the materials, and also the length of time, as noted in condition 4. So this application seeks to vary that condition so that it would be extended to the 31st of July this year to allow for completion of the house and removal of the mobile home. Reasons for refusal of the application were that the continued use of the land for the siting and use of temporary mobile home were not designed with due consideration for the context, and would therefore have an adverse impact on the surrounding greenbelt. And it notes that there were 2 earlier permissions which allowed the retention of the building for a period of 30 months at the time of this decision notice, and that it was considered a further period could not be justified in this instance, and that proposal would be contrary to Greenbelt Policy 8 in NPF 4, and also Greenbelt Policy and Design Policy in the Aberdeen Local Development Plan. So the applicant's case can be summarised as follows. It refers to the long planning history of the site, which is detailed in full in the report of handling in the agenda. And it states that the mobile home is needed for the supervision of the stud farm. It states that the mobile home is in a garden area of the house, or what will become part of the garden area of the house. They highlight the ease of moving the mobile home very quickly once it's no longer required. They state that the development of the stud business of the stables and the house have commenced, and they provide some photographs of the house. That without supervision, horses cannot be brought to site. And that they state that within this application, a very strict approach was taken, whereas other planning authorities have policies for temporary accommodation. And they state that the continued use of the mobile home would comply with Greenbelt policy as it's small scale ancillary to what exists. There's no increase in intensity of activity, and that's within the boundary of existing activity. And they also provide supporting letters from another stud business and a local vet. So just moving on to representations and consultations. No objections from the roads team or environmental health. In terms of waste, the refuse arrangements would remain as existing. There was no consultation response received from the Community Council. There were 2 neutral representations and 2 further comments that were also neutral, and those were on the basis that that the mobile home would be accepted until the summer, but that no further extensions should be allowed thereafter. So at this point, I'll hand back to you, Chair, for members to decide how to proceed.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members, reminder, if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision today, we request that further written information be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. At this moment, with the information we have so far, I'll include them within the papers. I'm happy to go ahead at the moment, but we'll go around the room. Councillor Copeland.
Agreed. I have got a couple of questions.
That's fine. And Councillor MacDonald.
I would agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll pass back to Ms. Green at the moment, Councillor Copeland, but we'll take your questions towards the end, if that's okay. Or the questions pertinent to at the moment.
I can tell you what the first one is. The first one is the house currently occupied, or is it still being built?
It's still being built, the house. There are photographs.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, so as members feel that we have sufficient information, we'll now pass back to Ms. Green, who will take us through the relevant policies and the considerations for this review. Ms. Green.
Just share this again. So the relevant policies and considerations are the Greenbelt policies in both National Planning Framework and the Local Development Plan, and also design policy in the Local Development Plan. So in terms of Greenbelt policy in NPF 4, it directs development to urban areas so that unsustainable growth is prevented. But more relevant to this particular case, it emphasises the impact on the character, landscape, natural setting and identity of settlements. So the character of the Greenbelt's protected and enhanced. As I mentioned, the 2 relevant policies from the local plan, and on the next slide I've just got the the text of the Greenbelt policy in the local plan. So it states that development within the Greenbelt will not be supported other than with certain exceptions. If I just run through those exceptions briefly. Associated with agriculture, woodland or forestry is the first one, related to leisure or recreation in a natural setting. The third one is extraction of minerals. Then D is for development associated with existing activities in the Greenbelt within the boundary of that activity, small scale, don't significantly increase the intensity of activity, and the proposed built construction is subordinate to what exists. The next one is for essential infrastructure. Then there's an exception for renewable energy, for a dwelling house to replace another dwelling house, for changes of use to historic buildings within the Greenbelt, or for the conversion of historic buildings. So in terms of design policy, see the Greenbelt setting is the important consideration here, and the policy seeks to ensure high standards of design for development with a strong and distinctive sense of place as a result of context appraisal and quality of architecture, craftsmanship and materials. And it recognises that not all development will be of a scale that makes a significant placemaking impact, but recognises that good design and detail add to the attractiveness of the environment. So in terms of evaluation of the application, just a reminder of the primacy of the development plan, which is NPF 4 and the local development plan. And the Planning Act requires all applications be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, with each application treated on merit. So for this particular application, how would the proposal sit with the Greenbelt policy in both NPF 4 and the local plan? How would they affect the character of the Greenbelt? And then considering that policy D1 on design is relevant. So does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there material considerations indicating otherwise? I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, members? Councillor MacDonald.
So just to get the timeline clear in my mind, Ms. Green, the house that is eventually going to be occupied has got planning permission, and were there any conditions on that other than the ones we've heard about to say that it had to be done in a particular time? And I note, I suppose my question is that the photographs that we saw of the inside, the outside seems to be, you know, fairly well advanced, but the inside, it doesn't look like it's been fitted out. And I'm no expert on how long these things take, but you know, getting in the kitchen or whatever it does. When were those photographs taken? Do you know?
Just see if I can. Don't know if it actually says when they were taken, but let me see.
I suppose my question is, are we aware of the fitting out of that new house has moved on since these were taken?
So yeah, so the LRB was submitted in March, and they were in the notice of review from March. Let's see if it says a date.
I mean, it's not materially matter, to be honest, in many ways, because it wouldn't be part of the planning consideration, but it was just to understand the timeline of the requests, because I did wonder why, if it was supposed to be done by October, the application seemed to come in December and then was determined in March. So time has been ticking on over all those months, and effectively now we are being asked to extend really for 2 and a bit months. Would that be correct?
Yes, till the end of July. So the house.
And what? And at the end of the July, does somebody go and make sure that it has happened? You know, so that it doesn't go on further. I'm just trying to understand what happens at the end of July.
Well, the condition would, under this application, the condition would, members were reminded, the date of October would change to July, and then that condition would require the removal of the mobile home. Right. Would require the removal of the mobile home, the completion of works to restore the land, and restoration of the land's use as curtilage to the house that's being built. So, you know, our usual checks on that would take place.
Fair enough, and I suppose there is a risk that there could be another application at the end of July.
I mean, there could be. Yeah.
Councillor Copeland, I had your hand. You're on mute, Councillor Copeland.
No, you're okay. The question was regarding 31st of July, but Councillor MacDonald covered that.
Okay. Any further questions, members? I don't think I've got any questions for myself. Therefore, in accordance with the procedural note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Determination.
I'd be happy to grant the extension to the 31st of July.
Yeah, I think I'm similarly minded on this. Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's certainly when I read through it and listened to, but it is concerning that it has dragged on, and for those, I think particularly because the site is in that sort of prominent, you know, at the top of a slope and so on. I think that, you know, it has to move forward, and I think end of July is acceptable, but anything further than that, in line with the representations as well, would just be unacceptable and would need to be dealt with swiftly.
Absolutely. Yep, therefore I'm happy to sort of go to that suggestions, and Ms. Green's also highlighted sort of conditions on the back there regarding the restoration of the curtilage and things like that following the completion of on that date. Are we happy with that regard to approve the extension?
Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay. So, yeah, we've also discussed conditions on that. So please note the decision of notice of today's meeting will be issued to applicant or agent in the next forthcoming days. Many thanks, members. Okay, I now have the correct documentation here. So turning to consideration of the second review in respect of the decision to refuse application for detailed plan permission for the change of use of flat to short-term let accommodation sui generis with a maximum occupancy of 4 people at first floor left, 22 Allen Street, Aberdeen, planning reference 231145. Again, we'll hear from planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Lucy Green, who will take us through the application. Ms. Green.
Thank you. Just share the screen. Okay, so this is a review in relation to the application at 22 Allen Street for first floor flat for a change of use to a short-term let. And the review was submitted with all the necessary information within the 3 months. The applicant has indicated on the notice of review that there are no new matters raised in the submissions. And in terms of procedure, the applicants expressed the view that the review may continue on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll continue to submit to provide some background information before handing back to members to decide how to proceed. Location plan. It's a first floor flat here on Allen Street. That's Broomhill Road down at the bottom there. Then image from Google Maps showing the property there. It's this one. And a street view image on the left here. That's the first floor here. And then this is showing the rear with stairs that provide access to the first floor. So this is the layout plan of the flat. 2 double bedrooms. In terms of the checklist, the applicant stated that this would be for 4 people maximum, so 2 bedrooms with 2 bed spaces in each. On-street parking would be available. Stays would be for a 3-night minimum with no maximum length of stay. It would be a short-term let on a permanent basis. And there would be a key box for the keys with check-in after 3 p.m. and people leaving by 10 a.m. The property would be cleaned after each stay. There are 2 flats off the shared communal access. So the application flat and 1 other. There would be no access to the garden. And it's been in use since September 2022. And as I mentioned, access would be via the side path down the gable of the building and up the rear stairs to a small hall, which provides access to the 2 first floor flats. So reasons for the decision were the impact on the amenity of the neighbour on the other first floor flat, with transient guests using the same hall and access, which would be detrimental to the privacy and sense of security of the flat, which, as I mentioned, is accessed by the side of the building and the stairs at the rear. Noise disturbance, with it being an STL compared to a mainstream flat, and that the proposal would be therefore contrary to National Planning Policy Framework 4, Policy 14 on design, and also policies in the Local Development Plan on residential areas, that's H1, D1 quality placemaking, and D2 amenity. And that despite the likely local economic benefits, the impact on local amenity would outweigh this. And the proposal would also therefore be contrary to Policy 30 on tourism in NPF 4. The applicant's case can be summarised as follows. The applicant states that they've been operating for more than a year without problem, that there have been no objections that they're aware of from neighbours regarding the shared access or disturbances or on issues of privacy or security, that the door to the short-term let is clearly signposted, and that guests, when they book, receive a checking-in video which shows them the route to the flat, so that reduces time that they spend looking for it. In terms of security, they state that the lockbox number is changed often, that the neighbours have the applicant's number so that they can call if there are any problems, and that the short-term let has been mainly used by contractors and there's been no significant noise from them. So relevant policies from NPF 4. As I've mentioned previously, policies 1, 2 and 3 relating to climate and nature crises, mitigation and biodiversity are relevant to all applications. Members should consider the likely magnitude of any impact of those for this particular application. Policy 12 relates to waste disposal. Policies 13 relate to sustainable transport and the proximity of the application site to public transport and active travel. Policy 16 on quality homes, I've got on a slide in a moment, and policy 30 will also be shown on the next slide. So policy 30 relates to tourism in NPF 4, and it generally encourages and promotes sustainable tourism. Section E is particularly relevant to these short-term let applications, and it states that development proposals for the reuse of existing buildings for short-term holiday lets will not be supported where the proposal would result in an unacceptable impact on local amenity or the character of the neighbourhood or area, or the loss of residential accommodation where that loss is not outweighed by local economic benefits. And then policy 16 on quality homes in NPF 4, that also reiterates the impact on residential amenity that's mentioned in policy 30. So moving on to local development plan policies, sites zoned within a residential area. So I'll cover policy H1 in more detail on the next slide, together with VC2 on tourism. So policy D1 on design and relates to sort of amenity and privacy of the occupiers of neighbouring premises. Policy R5 is waste management for new developments. And as I'll mention in a minute, the waste team have no objection to the proposal the existing on-street waste bins would be used. And then policy T2 on sustainable transport and parking. There would be on-street parking, and the roads team had commented that the proposed use would not have a different impact on parking to an existing residential use. And then T2 on sustainable transport relates to public transport and active travel. So looking at policy H1, as I mentioned, the sites within a residential area. And in those areas, proposals for non-residential use, which this would be, will be supported where they are considered complementary to residential use, or where it can be demonstrated that there would be no conflict, nuisance to the enjoyment of existing residential amenity. And then policy VC2 encourages visitor attractions and facilities that support those. and that states that they should be sequentially located in the city centre. So the relevant consideration for that policy is the location in relation to the city centre. And policy D2, which considers amenity of residence in terms of a number of factors that include levels of privacy. And then there's the government's publication on short-term lets, which shows how short-term lets can make an important contribution to the tourist economy with unique experiences through the host's knowledge. They offer accommodation in places not necessarily served by hotels and hostels. They can be more affordable and they can cover additional capacity during events, etc. And the research which showed the common positive impact is the local economic impact associated with tourism. Then Circular 1 2023 on short-term lets makes a few relevant points. It refers to policy 30 considerations. It says that they should be balanced against wider policy objectives within the development plan, and also that planning authorities may grant the use for a limited time. So as before, primacy of the development plan in making decisions, with all applications determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and each application treated on its merits. So in this particular case, the zoning policy H1, what impact would the proposal have on residential amenity? The appropriateness of the location for a short-term let and the impact on the local economy. And overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there material considerations indicating otherwise? And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green. So just going quickly through, I take it all members are happy that we have sufficient information to proceed. That's all
Yes.
agreed. Any questions for Ms. Green? Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, I wondered on the definition of tourism in this context, if particularly if contractors are using, you know, the short-term let, and that is not tourism as we might think of it, but it's certainly you know, it impacts on or it could be considered a type of tourism, given that the people don't actually stay locally. What would be the definition of that? Do you have any knowledge?
I mean, in terms of planning, we obviously wouldn't be controlling who was staying in the property. So I suppose we'd just look at it in terms of the impact on the local economy, as that seems to be the relevance in terms of the policies.
Mm-hmm.
And can I just ask how the condition around no access to the garden is that enforceable if there was somebody that turned up that wanted to go and do a bit of sunbathing or whatever?
I mean, we haven't conditioned that to my knowledge, because it would be very difficult to enforce. I mean, I suppose it's just the same as anybody going into anybody else's garden.
Yeah, I guess I have similar questions around that as well regarding the circular that came out regarding tourism, and then the application specifically state that we have contractors. So again, it's a very difficult one for us to actually condition and say, well, you can only let the contractors, I guess. Councillor Copeland, any questions?
No, I'm happy. I've been told everything. I would comment that if it's contractors, I suppose they're contributing to the local economy. They'll be using the local shops.
Yeah. Okay. So if there's no further questions, in accordance with the procedure and notes circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I'd highlight that all representations relating to this case have been considered and taken into account. I would, this has been operating as an STL since November 22, so this is obviously a bit of a retrospective one up with the current updated plan of guidance. I note that there has been no, I've got to be careful with this, there's been no objections to the property itself and the use of the property. There's been 2 representations received in terms of the use of the bins, which has been addressed, and the parking, which has been addressed. I'm happy that the applicant has noted that they have provided their contact details to the rest of the property as well. So therefore, if there is any issues, then the people who own the property, the agents can be contacted to sort the issue out. So therefore, when it comes to local amenity and the policies that have been stated, I'm not convinced on the refusal at this point. How are others minded?
I'd be minded to grant, quite frankly.
So I, and in the balancing act that these always come down to, I just didn't feel that it was unacceptable impact, given that it had been in operation and for the other things that you mentioned, convener. I think we should put a time restriction on it as we are able to do, I'd be happy to grant this in this particular case, and it is that kind of balance between between the different policies, but in this case, I think probably go with it.
Yeah. Ms. Green, the condition of the time limit?
Yes, would that be the 5-year?
Yeah.
Can be attached.
Members happy with that?
Yes.
Agreed. Thank you very much. So therefore, the application has been overturned and the decision notice will be sent out to the agent in the forthcoming days. Thank you very much. So turning to the consideration of the 3rd review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for detailed plan permission for the erection of a single-storey extension to the side and rear, formation of a dormer to rear and formation of a roof terrace on rear extension at 63 Grove Crescent, Aberdeen, planning reference 231029. We'll pass back to Ms. Green, who will take us through the applications. And as a reminder, Ms. Green will not be able to express any view of the merits of the proposed development, and her role will be a neutral one involved in the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms. Green.
Thanks. I'll just share my screen. So this review is into the refusal of the application for the erection of single-storey extension to the side and rear, formation of a dormer to the rear, and formation of roof terrace on the rear extension. And the review has been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. Although the applicant has indicated on the notice that there were no new matters raised, however, drawings were submitted that were not in front of the case officer at the time of determination and are therefore new matters. And I'll come back to this later in the slides. In terms of procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that the review should not proceed on the basis of the information submitted, and there should be a site visit in order to evaluate the site, see the context and examples within the area. The form also indicates that the client may wish to make further written statement, but I've assumed that that's been added to the form as there's a section in different handwriting, and we haven't received anything further. So I'll provide some background to the case before handing back to members to decide how to proceed. So this is the location plan, and the application relates to a single-storey semi-detached property on the south side of Grove Crescent within Cornhill. And there's quite a large garden to the rear with a garage at the south end. So an image from Google Street View showing the house there. It's the boundary of the property. And you can see the neighbouring house there with a rear extension. Zoomed up image there, so it's the application house. And some 3D images, so that's the rear of the property. And the front of the property there, side, and the rear garden. And that's a street view image of the front. So the plans as existing, and then as proposed, showing the proposed dormer, single-storey flat-roofed extension with a roof terrace on top, and then a proposed side extension. And this is the boundary with the attached neighbour. And this is the ground floor plan. It's the roof terrace, the dormer and the side extension, and this is the existing plan. Although this extension on top of the first floor garage is shown on these plans, there are no elevations, and it's also not within the description, so it's the case officer has not considered that element within the application. Existing roof plan. And the ground floor plan as proposed, so that extension, single-storey extension to the rear side extension. This is to the west side, so the existing, and then the proposed extension showing the rear, the dormer added, and the roof terrace with glazed balustrades. And these two extensions would be hauled, which would match the house. Again, from the south, see the end of the rear extension, and then the side extension and the dormer. And there would be sliding glazed doors in the rear elevation of the extension, and a glazed safety balustrade proposed for the roof terrace with double glazed sliding aluminium frame doors at the ground floor level. And this is the north elevation, the front of the house. So you can see that this is the side extension with a door and a window. So the reason for refusal, which is stated in full in the report within the agenda, the main points are that together the rear and side extensions, the roof terrace and the dormer, would overwhelm the dwelling, resulting in overdevelopment and being contrary to policy H1 on residential areas. That the projection of the rear extension, which is 4.5 metres along the boundary, does not accord with the householder guidance, which states that rear extensions like this should be should extend a maximum of 4 metres on the boundary. The impact on the privacy of neighbours due to the dormer and the roof terrace, which don't accord with guidance. The daylight and sunlight would have an adverse impact, adverse impact on the neighbour, the attached neighbour, that is. That the design and scale would affect the character and aesthetics of the house and the area, and they would lack balance with the adjoining property at number 61 and would be therefore contrary to policy D1 on design, policy 14 and NPF 4 on design, policy 16 on quality homes, and the Aberdeen Planning Guidance Householder Guide on dormers and extensions. So for the applicant's case, they state, well, this is a summary of their case. They state that the area is mixed use and includes residential. That the proposals take account of the context, including nearby properties, and are in keeping with the surrounding area and certainly no worse in design, size, scale, materials. They state that the property would not be adversely compromised by the changes and that the essential characteristics would remain and the appearance would be improved. They state that there's a precedent been created by neighbouring properties that have been extended, that the proposal would merit a site visit and discussion on site by the LRB, and they have also submitted revised drawings, which, as I noted before, those are the subject of new information. So the drawings were included in the agenda, and they show a pitched roof to the rear extension, a different sized dormer. They would actually require a fresh application because they're sufficiently different from the drawings that have been submitted, that have been considered by the case officer. But I'm going to hand over to legal now to run through the test for new information.
Thank you, Ms. Green. A new matter is any information or evidence that was not before the planning officer when they made their decision. The legislation is clear that a party can raise a new matter in an LRB only if the new matter could not have been raised before the decision was made, or that it not being raised before that time was a consequence of exceptional circumstances. It is for the party who wants to raise a new matter in an LRB to explain in their submissions why the new matter meets the criteria above and provide any supporting documents or evidence. The LRB should then decide whether to accept or reject the new matter. If the LRB accepts the new matter, it will consider it along with the other information and evidence in the review. If the LRB rejects the new matter, it will not take it into account in the review. I will now hand back to the LRB for members to have a discussion on whether they are satisfied that they have been provided with the information to conclude that the above criteria has been met in order for the LRB to take the new matter into account in the determination of the review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Discussion on this, members. I'm obviously concerned regarding the substantial material difference from the original application to the additional information that has been provided to us in regards to the elevations. It's the additional submitted information is completely different to what the case officers originally reviewed.
I don't feel comfortable, convener, determining this, to be honest. I genuinely thought they were half-baked plans, and that's what I wrote down on my summary. So I would agree with you totally.
Councillor Copeland.
Well, I took the view that based on what we were told that what the applicant was now wanting was totally different to what the officer had adjudicated. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we've got two choices here: either accept the original and make an adjudication on what the officer saw, or I don't know if we can simply just defer this and clarify the matter, and if the applicant was to put in a new application, they can do so. I mean, really, I feel the same as Councillor MacDonald. I mean, what are we supposed to make a decision on? What was in originally? But the new stuff that needs to be looked at by officers.
I'll take Ms Johnson back in here, but I may think that we need to, and correct me if I'm wrong, dismiss the additional information, proceed to determine on the information that has been provided and submitted to the case officer, and depending on the outcome of that, the applicant would need to resubmit the new drawings to be reviewed. Would that be correct, Ms Johnston?
Yeah, just to clarify, the test in regards to this, the new plans that have been submitted, the test they need to consider is whether either, you know, they're satisfied that the reasoning behind that, you know, have they been able to demonstrate that it could not have been made beforehand, or that it's not been raised was as a matter of exceptional circumstances. Now, if you're of the view that that test isn't satisfied, then the new matters, the additional plans that's been submitted along with the notice of review will not be considered as part of the review.
Yeah.
So I guess it's assessing whether that test that was set out in the slide beforehand is met. If not, then they can't be considered as part of this review.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that this can be considered. I don't think it meets the test. If all honesty, if this is what the applicant wanted to propose, then they could have submitted that. I think this has been a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the officer's recommendations coming back, to which the applicant has then come back and changed the quite substantially the applications in hope that we would accept. Therefore, at the moment, I wouldn't feel comfortable accepting the additional information. I do not feel that it meets the test at this point. How are others minded? Agreed. Thank you very much. Therefore, we'll pass it back to Ms Green to take us through the rest of the application.
Well, at that point, I was due to come back to you to consider whether you wish to, how you wish to proceed. Obviously, the applicant has asked for a site visit. Yeah.
I think, in terms of where I'm coming from, I'm happy to proceed with the information we've received so far on the original documentation.
Agreed.
I would agree as well.
Thank you. Back to you, Ms Green.
Right. So relevant policies in terms of the consideration of the application. National Planning Framework Policies 1, 2 and 3, as we've mentioned before, Policy 14 on design and Policy 16 on quality homes. And as I mentioned previously, the first three policies are overarching and relevant to all applications. Decisions should give significant weight to the climate and nature crises, climate mitigation and biodiversity in relation to the scale of the proposal. Policy 14 relates to design and is similar to policies on design in the local development plan, which I'll cover in a moment. And policy 16 relates to high quality homes and the impact of proposals on residential amenity. So I've got a slide showing that policy for the detail. Section G, which relates to householder development proposals, and states that they will be supported where they do not have a detrimental impact on the character of the home and the surrounding area in terms of their size, design and materials, and where they do not have a detrimental effect on neighbouring properties in terms of their physical impact, overshadowing and overlooking. Policies in the local development plan. Site lies within an area zoned under policy H1 residential areas, and I'll cover that policy on the next slide. Then also relevant are policy D1 on design and policy D2 on amenity, and that policy covers optimising views and sunlight, levels of amenity for occupiers and neighbours, privacy, daylighting. And then we also have the household guidance, which I'll cover in a moment. So policy H1 on residential areas, household development will be approved in principle where it doesn't constitute overdevelopment, doesn't have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area. There's no loss of open space, and it complies with supplementary guidance, which in this instance is the householder design guide. And that's also used to look at the matters of whether the proposal is overdevelopment and its impact on the neighbours. So I'll just move on to the next slide, which covers the householder design guide and its general principles, where it states that proposals for extensions and dormers should be architecturally compatible with the original house and surrounding area. Materials should be complementary, and extensions and alterations should not overwhelm or dominate the original house. They should be visually subservient in terms of their height, mass and scale. And then the other point 3, which states that proposals approved prior to the introduction of the planning guidance would not provide justification for going against the guidance. So factors within the guidance that are relevant here. In terms of dormers and roof extensions, they should respect the scale of the building and shouldn't overwhelm the original roof. In terms of extensions along the mutual boundary, semi-detached houses, 4 metres is considered the maximum length that they should be. For plot coverage, it states that no more than 50% of the rear curtilage should be covered. And just on that one, the report of handling states that plot coverage is 23% in this instance. And also that no more than twice the original house in terms of its footprint. The proposal should result in no more than twice the original house as a footprint, which the report states this proposal does not exceed that. I think it's 75%. So policies on design. D1 is from the local development plan and states that all development must ensure high standards of design so that there's a distinctive sense of place created. And policy 14 has the same 6 tests as are in the local development plan. Again, designed in terms of the scale of the impact on the original building. Creating a sense of place with design and architectural quality and the choice of materials. And both recognise that development at any scale, good design and detailing adds to the attractiveness of the built environment. So evaluation, again, the primacy of the development plan, the national planning framework and the local development plan, with all applications determined in accordance with the plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and considering each application on its merits. So in this instance, the key considerations are the impact on residential amenity of the neighbour. How does the proposal affect the character of the house, the original house, the character of the area, and also the amenity of the neighbouring properties? Does the proposal comply with the development plan as a whole, or are there material considerations indicating otherwise? And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green, and I understand members are happy to take questions without the requirement for a site visit, etc., etc.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Any question?
Yeah.
Councillor MacDonald.
It was something that was mentioned by the applicant, this being a mixed use area, including residential. And I just wanted to query that, because my understanding and knowledge of the area is that out with perhaps a wider sense where the hospital is there, this is actually a residential area, is it not?
Yes, I assume they must be referring to the proximity of the hospital.
Thank you.
I've got no questions at this point. Councillor Copeland? No, you're happy. I'm great at lip reading.
Terribly sorry. I'm happy.
Okay. So therefore, thank you very much, Ms. Green. So in accordance with the procedural note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which this case is to proceed. To note that all considerations have been taken into account. On consideration of the original plans that were submitted, I'm minded to uphold officers' refusal on this, noting that the dwelling results in no development and therefore proposal does not adhere to relevant policies in terms of policy H1, further pointing to affecting the character and resulting in the unbalance of the symmetry between other properties around the area, and that the projection does not adhere to council guidance, and further to highlight that the proposed doormat and roof terrace does not comply with the criteria outlined in the Household Development Guide with the contained within the Aberdeen Planning Guidance, is where I'm coming from this. Anyone else want to enter? Councillor MacDonald?
Thank you. I think there were some aspects of this application that were commendable, and I think when we certainly saw the photographs, anything that could be done to improve the site a little bit would be welcome. I think compared to the building and the adjoining it, but I tend to agree with you. I think the balustrade, the glazed balustrade, would just be intrusive. There is overdevelopment. That boundary width. Length of 4.5 meters, it would be unacceptable, and I think I would agree with you, and we should uphold officers' recommendations in terms of NPF 4 and local development plan.
Councillor Copeland?
Yes, totally agree. I think it is intrusive in the neighbour's privacy as well, and I totally agree with the officer with this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Therefore, the local review body has therefore agreed to unanimously uphold the decision of the appointed officer, and the application is therefore refused. Please note, a decision notice from today's meeting will be issued to the applicant and agent in the forthcoming days. Members, that brings us to the end of today's LRB. Thank you all much for your attendance, and thank you very much to Ms. Green and Ms. Johnson for attending as well to provide the guidance.
Thank you.